What do you get when you combine a dozen professional minds and over 100 years of experience? It's Inside on Tap. So, welcome to Insight on Tap, where each episode we interview a different member of Yancy Forums. Right now, we are speaking to Rich Greiner. Rich is a former Navy SEAL who is now an emergency physician. Rich, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background? I think your story is actually really fascinating. I don't know a lot of people who have, I think, depth and breadth of experience that you have with your career in the Navy and then have gone on to do some of the work you're doing in medicine. So I'd rather hear from you.
Well, sure. So I went to Naval Academy, so I kind of committed myself right out of high school to that plus 5 or so years. I wound up doing 7. And so coming out of the Naval Academy, at first I thought I wanted to fly jets, but then once I had a little bit of experience in the summertime, I really kind of was excited about Navy SEALs and had a little Navy diver experience in there too, which made me totally locked on the idea of being a Navy SEAL. So after I graduated, and actually my grades weren't good enough to go right to the SEALs. It was pretty selective. A lot of people wanted to do it. So I went to ship for 2 years in San Diego, which actually was a great experience. And I got to learn leadership in that arena first, where you actually lead more people, maybe a little bit less, risk on a day-to-day basis. But I got to learn to lead people. I was in charge of like 20 to 30 people and worked to learn like the kind of the bigger picture Navy and the ship Navy for almost 2 years until I was able to kind of qualify high enough and get my captain to allow me to put in for a transfer. And then I qualified for a transfer to the SEALs and went through SEAL training and then spent 4 or 5 years in the SEALs at SEAL Team 3, finishing up as a platoon commander. After that, I knew kind of when I was finishing up that tour, which at the time was kind of the pinnacle of what you get to do, I thought, operationally as an officer in the SEALs. So I was kind of looking at what was going to be next. And I didn't see myself finishing a career in the Navy because it was, I did about the most exciting thing I thought there was. So I always thought about being a doctor. So I planned on getting out and becoming a doctor and made that transition. I didn't really think about any other kind of medicine other than emergency medicine. It really kind of fit the kind of person I was and what I was interested in. And I probably a little bit like the military too, a little bit chaotic. So, and kind of small teams oriented. So it worked out really well. So I trained in emergency medicine and now I've been practicing as an emergency physician for about the last 15 or 17 years. And then the last handful of years I've gotten involved in some leadership in medicine too, which I really enjoy. So I like to do a little bit of both. I like to see patients in the ER and then try to help out other doctors and help the hospital system as much as I can.
All right. Well, so take me back to the beginning. How exactly did you first end up interested in the military and even, deciding to become a Navy SEAL? I know you said at first your grades weren't good enough, but then you kind of got them there. I mean, I would presume that not everybody who ends up in the military or starts in the military is thinking, I want to become a Navy SEAL someday. Like when were you bit by the bug, I guess is what I'm asking.
Well, probably at a pretty young age, I thought about the military. My mom's family actually grew up on West Point, so they kept pushing me to think about West Point. But I'm a bit biased, and I'll tell you, I don't like their uniforms. And also I'm a water guy, so I grew up as a swimmer and played water polo, and so I really wanted to be in the water. And plus, we took a trip to San Diego one time, and my dad was in the military for like 2 years as a lawyer, and they were stationed in Newport, Rhode Island, and San Diego. And so when we visited there, I was definitely hooked. And when I heard that there was an option to go to college at the Naval Academy. And then at that time, I thought I wanted to become a jet pilot because my dad had exposed me to some air shows. We watched the Blue Angels, and I thought that looked awesome. And Top Gun had just come out, and I'm like, whoa, sign me up for that deal. I get to fly jets and go to San Diego and live that life. I'm like, that sounds pretty awesome. So that was what I thought I wanted to do. And then when I got to Naval Academy, I got exposed to a little bit of every type of the Navy, the ship Navy, the submarine Navy, the Marines a little bit, the pilots, the aircraft, and then the SEALs was actually a small part of it, and Navy divers. So I did a summer with Navy divers, which was incredible and really challenging. While I was there, we're going through the training. It was one of the first time they let midshipmen go through it. And the instructors, were giving us all this really tough training. And they were like, this is the second hardest military training in the world. And, of course, I was like, well, what's the hardest? And they said, Navy SEALs. I'm like, oh, back then it wasn't that popular. You hadn't heard about it. So I was like, sign me up for that. So then I got a little bit of exposure to that like the following year and got to do like a mini 3-week program that was like SEAL training, and that was like the hardest thing I'd ever done, and I loved that. So I was totally sold on that. But when I graduated, my grades weren't that awesome, and at the time it was really competitive to get into the SEALs, so I had to do the Navy, the ship Navy first, which I actually really enjoyed, and that was a great time too because actually I got to live in San Diego, and I had a lot of friends there. And I got to learn how to lead a division. I showed up at the ship. I didn't know anything. All these guys knew everything about the division, and still, like I guess because of where they taught me and what I was supposed to have learned at the Naval Academy, I was supposed to be able to lead this division, and that was humbling and fun, and it was a great experience. And then over like the next 2 years, I learned about the ship Navy and about my particular ship, and I learned enough that I got to qualify to a level that my captain was okay endorsing me to apply to the SEAL program. So then I went to SEAL program and was in the SEALs for 4 or 5 years, and then finished up as a platoon commander. So I totally love that. And then towards the end of that, I realized that a lot of people got out at that stage. As a junior officer, there wasn't a whole lot more fun stuff to do right away at that time. So a lot of people were getting out and going to business school, but I knew I kind of always wanted to be a doctor. So my plan was always to get out and go to medical school. So that was still in the back of my head, or really was what I really wanted to do. So I'm glad I pursued that.
You have an interesting take on fun, man. I can see you like pushing yourself. Just correct me if I'm wrong. Tell me if I'm way off here. I saw a program years ago. Can't even remember what channel it was on, and it was on Navy SEAL training. And they had all these guys that run on this beach, and they were just falling out. And they were saying that I think it was something like, I don't remember what percentage of people actually even completed the training, but it was so rigorous that it was like seriously tough. Was that kind of like your experience?
Well, yeah, I mean, the numbers really haven't changed. I'm glad to say I've kept in touch a little bit with people who are still out at the training sites, and I think it's still pretty much that 70% of the trainees drop out, so 30% make it through training. And there's some days that are more rigorous than others. And of course, when you start, like we started training with 150 people in what they call pre-training, and I think by the time we started real training, we were down to 120. By the time we made it to Hell Week, which is like 7 weeks later, we were down to about 35. But there was definitely some days where quitting was contagious, as an epidemic. But plus, it's like, just whatever you're doing that day. If you happen to be like a really cold day and you're spending a whole lot of time in the surf, or you just did like a really difficult activity with like log PT, or you basically just barely survived, or you thought you weren't going to survive an underwater swim, there are definitely some days and some activities that you could literally see like a handful of people all quit at the same time. And plus, sometimes once one or two people quit, it kind of gets in these other guys' heads, and they're like, "Wow, if that guy's quitting, how am I ever going to make it?" So yeah, there's days like that. But I just never thought it was an option.
That's awesome. How did that kind of translate for you into a sort of mental toughness into the rest of your career? And then I guess, how does that translate for you at all in your career now?
Well, it helps me stay calm under pressure. And I do kind of appreciate chaos. I couldn't see being a different kind of a doctor. I really like the emergency room. So I think it really works well in that setting, at least as a clinical doctor. If someone comes in and, everyone's all excited because either they're bleeding a lot or they're not breathing and everyone's running around, you kind of have to, as a doctor, take charge of the situation and be the calm in the room. And that's a lot easier to do if you've been in really challenging or really kind of scary environments. And so it might also kind of be my nature, but it probably helped in that way. And also, the leadership background I had from the military kind of helps me also read the room and, help kind of give people direction so that, we're all working together as a team. It's a little different in the military versus medicine. We call it the practice of medicine. And in the military, you'll practice something like hundreds of times, in the event that you might actually get to go do it in war. I was kind of in the SEALs, like in between wars. So I didn't have a whole lot of battlefield experience, but I can tell you, like, whenever we're not fighting someone directly, all we're doing is practicing for it, drilling, pretending, practice, and do these evolutions over and over. So you're so good at them, you can do it with hand signals in the dark, without signals. In medicine, basically every patient is a new patient, and you're practicing each time. So we do the first few years when you're out of medical school, you're practicing, but you're still practicing on real people. And sometimes you do a little bit of simulation, but there's a lot more kind of learn as you go. So I think the medical field might benefit from a little bit more practice, not on patients, but that's a different story.
That's got to be helpful, though. That I think, with that being said, to have someone like yourself present, just to kind of have that perspective that, like, hey, there's some ways that maybe we could tighten up around here. Maybe through some systems or through some practicing. But like you said, it's going to be new with every person. I don't know. Are there any things that you can practice doing that work out so that when you actually do have a different, or is it so varied that every single time you have a new patient that it's kind of like there's not much to practice? You either know what you're doing or you don't.
No, there's always benefit to practice. And each time you do something, you are learning and you're learning a little bit as a team, but there's also real benefit to do. We do simulations all the time, especially in Bridgeport Hospital. We do them like with trauma simulations or resuscitation simulations. And simulators are getting better and better at like looking like the real thing and giving vital signs that are like the real thing. So and people, when you're doing a simulation, you feel like it. Your heart rate goes fast when the simulated patient almost stops breathing or stops breathing. So there's huge benefit to practicing. So we do some of it. A good hospital system, and I think where I work, we're really well supported, and we do have time for that sort of training. And they definitely do it more in residency, when they're in between medical school and finishing their training. So yeah, there's definitely benefit to that. I think there's a lot of benefit to doing it after residency too, and doing it as a team, because that's really the benefit that you get in the military is when you do stuff together as a team, then everyone knows like who's moving where, when, and with what signal and in what circumstance. So that's really nice if you practice that as a team with simulation. So, nurses know, well, I'm the IV nurse and I'm the lead nurse and I'm the one who's getting the meds and this is the person doing the CPR and this is the person who's going to do this other procedure. And, I'm the one who's just kind of keeping the big picture in mind and calling the consultants and maybe doing some procedures or making sure that we keep the person alive or whatever. So there's huge benefit to practice and you have to do it everywhere. It's good to have a system that supports that.
That's awesome, man. And I'd imagine having those calm under pressure, nerves of steel really, really comes into handy as well, particularly probably from leadership, no, in that environment.
I think it helps. I mean, people kind of gravitate towards what works for them. So yeah, I think most emergency physicians have that to the most extent. If you don't have that, you might have nurses on the team who are really good at it. But in general, most, clinicians that I've seen in emergency medicine have that too. So you develop it over time, or you may not thrive in that setting and you find something else to do. So I think a lot of people do that. But for me, it probably came easier because I'd had some experience with that sort of stress. Yeah.
So how exactly did you find your way into this Yancy Forums group from this position as an emergency physician?
Well, sure. I'd been, emergency physician maybe about 10 years, and I'd been at Bridgeport Hospital maybe 4 or 5 years. And I think the person who put me in touch with the Yancy Forums was Dr. Ivy. He'd been the chief medical officer at Bridgeport, and I think he'd been the head surgeon and the trauma team. And so he'd been in the ER a lot, and he was just a really personable guy. And as the chief medical officer, he knew most of, or if not all of the doctors in the hospital. And he knew a lot from different hospitals too. So I think Earl Yancy approached him and said, hey, do you have a group that might benefit from this? And Mike is a yes kind of guy and kind of knew that there would be benefit to putting together a bunch of different people at similar levels of kind of mid-career leadership to learn from a group like this. And so I think he kind of asked the right people if they had some people that would fit into this. And I didn't hear about people who said no. When I heard about it, it's pretty vague. I think it's probably designed to be that way. And I just heard, well, do you want to get together with a bunch of other mid-career doctors and solve problems? And I didn't have any problems that I thought needed to be solved at the time, but I'm like, I like to learn new stuff and try new things and work with people. And if I can help them solve their problems, it sounded great. So I was all in. It just sounded different. I know that one thing I learned in the military, if there's usually it was more like if there's a different opportunity or a different place to go and they offer it to you, just go. So like even a friend of mine was like our radio man, and he got to go to Eritrea or Ethiopia. And it was like, at the time, it was like the worst place to go. Everyone was like, oh my God, why would you go there? And he still loved it. He's like, it's something different. He saw a different culture. It was like the hottest place on earth at the time. It was a war torn, but still it's like, you don't get chances to go in places like that very often. Yeah, it was a new experience. So I said, sign me up.
Okay, so when you got in unknown territory, what was it that you found? I mean, obviously you stuck with it. We're talking here on the podcast. There's got to be something in there that's you found that was unique. What is it to you that you found that you actually think is like of value that got you to stick around beyond just a kind of cursory glance and maybe a meeting or two?
Oh, sure. Well, the forum group, it kind of quickly develops into a group where you know the other people really well and kind of set up to help solve each other's like professional and departmental and personal problems. And so to get there, there's icebreakers and there's, you get to know each other pretty quickly. And we just have great chemistry too. And probably in general, I don't work with too many doctors. I couldn't imagine being together in a group like this, but maybe for the first group, we just got lucky and got great chemistry. So I think that was it. First, it was just the people, but then the process, I liked it too because it was great for ice breaking, learning trust, learning about other people. We kind of learned like people's background, their career, so that you really got to know the person and you kind of built trust right away. And then, we did some fun things together, like team building events. And then we got into the work and tried to help people with their challenges that they have for their department. And I think all of us naturally want to help people, whether it's patients or each other. And that was just easy. It was fun and it was a little bit of a challenge. And you're getting to know other people and you're building a friend group. So it was a no brainer. It was easy and I wasn't going anywhere.
Oh, that's awesome. So the fun things that you did, refresh my memory again, because I know all the different groups go on different activities. I know sometimes people go to a casino, or I know that the Range Rover driving school was like a cool one. I think you guys did that, but I know that there's the Falconer, I think one time. What have you guys actually done so far in your?
Oh, we did that Range Rover experience, and that was fun. We learned a little bit about fly fishing. We did some hiking. I think a few different times we would share some, music that we liked with other people and share some drinks. All that was fun. All of those are like kind of good icebreakers and team building events. Like the Range Rover experience is the kind of thing where some people naturally gravitate towards the driver position right away because they're not afraid and that maybe they're into roller coasters or whatever. And that's fun. And then there's other people who are hesitant and then kind of they come out of their shells and most of them decide that they want to drive and they overcome their fears. And that's fun and exciting and stuff too, because these vehicles are pretty impressive at what they can tolerate. Like on this course, you don't think that a car could like stick to a track like that, but it really does. And it's not even like a track. Usually it's just like some kind of off-road course in the woods. It's made for like an ATV, but these vehicles just stick to it. So that was fun. All these things that you probably wouldn't do otherwise, they are fun to do with like this, with a new group. So all that was great.
That's pretty cool. I gotta tell you, just as a quick anecdote, I went to a Range Rover driving school once. That's why I keep asking about it. I went to a Range Rover driving school once. It was my grandfather and I and my younger brother, and this was like, I can't remember how old we were, but I was really impressed that on this particular course, it was like, man, the bottom wheel could drop down like 3 feet out from and then another wheel would be like all up, underneath the actual car itself. Like it would accommodate to the road. So even though that would look like you're driving over some huge ditch, the car is actually kind of doing its own thing and keeping you stable. But the thing I wanted to bring up was my grandfather got behind the wheel of the car. And I don't think that the guy who was running the course expected this older guy to kind of take off the way he did. Just fearless, just went right through this thing. And yeah, it's like being on a giant bumpy roller coaster. My brother and I were in the back seat looking at each other like, oh my gosh, but it was fun.
For sure. Yeah, it was surprising to me too. I don't know what it looks like from the side so much because I was going through it like consecutively and I'm not sure what the vehicle looked like, but I was just trusting that, hey, if they let us go on this course, the car will probably not roll, but I was ready to, if it was going to roll, I'm like, let's see how that goes too. It's not my vehicle. I assume that they've got other vehicles. So I was all for it. So I have tried other interesting vehicle trips. We got like sort of trained in desert patrol vehicles, which essentially are dune buggies that are made to drive in the desert really fast at night. And I think when the SEALs first started using them, they just went to like the fastest dune buggy racing company and said, hey, develop us some, fast, tough vehicles that we can drive at night. So they were still kind of relatively new when we were using them. And the training basically consisted of, hey, go out on this course or just go drive through all this desert in Arizona and just, go look for this target and then shoot it up. So our desert patrol vehicles were outfitted with like a 50 caliber machine gun on top or a rocket or a grenade launcher on top. And we had like, radios on there. And then we had like another M60 rifle on the lower part. So there's 3 people. And just because I wasn't going to be the grenade launcher or the 60 gunner or the 50 cal gunner, I was like the driver. So we didn't really get a whole lot of like education. It was just basically go out and start driving. I guess we probably drove a couple times during the day before they gave us the night driving, but we pretty quickly just went on night vision goggles and did it at night at like 60 miles an hour and hit a bunch of ravines. And again, I just trusted the vehicle because these things had amazing tires and struts. And luckily we didn't hurt anybody, but it wasn't uncommon to like knock off a wheel or break a tire or rupture a tire or something. And part of the drill and part of learning these things was, swapping out parts and, not just changing tires, but trying to repair the vehicle too. So that was a ton of fun.
That sounds awesome. So you're just so I'm trying to picture this. So you're driving this dune buggy, and there's somebody with an M80 just cranking away at a target while you're flying through the desert at night.
I mean, they had to do a little bit of that, and I think the Gulf War, but most of the time you should be static when you're shooting. When you want to make your shots count. So you just drive real fast to a site. Should stop and sight in and shoot. Yeah, it's just the movies that make it look like you should be shooting and driving at the same time. That's not a good call.
That's pretty much my experience is watching the Expendables. So that's awesome. So what is it kind of like in your forum? I know you said that I mean obviously you're a really adventurous guy and you're you've got this really cool background with the military. Are your other forum members, are they made up of people who also have similar backgrounds, not dissimilar backgrounds? Are you guys all kind of varied, or do you kind of stick out like a sore thumb in the group? Like, how does that, I know obviously you guys all get along and you gel very well, but I'm just curious, are you kind of like the military guy, or are you guys all from like really unique backgrounds?
No, I'm kind of like the token military guy. I'd like to think I don't stick out so much like a sore thumb, but we're all kind of similar, like mid-career doctors in leadership positions. Maybe some are slightly higher leadership positions, some are leading a smaller group, but we're all closer to the same age and amount of experience. So everyone has known what they're doing in medicine for a long time and is really involved in trying to make their department or their specialty better within the hospital or even within the health system. So it's a lot of like similarly like-minded people, but coming from different hospitals. Like there's some from Greenwich, and we had a guy from L&M and some Bridgeport and from Yale. People with kind of different delivery networks that at least see how things are done differently and different specialties, which really helps too. We had surgery and OB and some medicine and hospitalist doctors and emergency doctors. So I guess it's nice that way we have some diversity, but we also have enough similarities that we can help each other, because a lot of what we do is pretty specialized. And, if it helps to really understand like the general medical problems or the general makeup of the hospital, or to have had some of these challenges before, even from different places. So I think that's how we can help each other and see each other's issues. And we're also kind of at similar stages. We think most of us are at the stage where we have kids, usually a little bit older. So a lot of that always comes up, and we try to help each other with those issues too.
That's awesome. That's kind of what I was trying to get at. Maybe could have worded it a little differently, but what I've noticed from a lot of the forum groups is that you get people in there who it's like there's different backgrounds, or everybody's kind of got their different story, right? But it's like y'all all kind of arrive at similar places where you're equally invested in, making a positive impact in whatever your avocation is. So like there was a teachers forum that they've had, and it's like you had all these people who were really stand out. They'd all won an award for essentially teacher of the year in the state of Connecticut, right? They were all different. They all came from different backgrounds. They had different schools, but once you got them in a room and they started to talk, it was like, it's like magic happening, because it's like they're all speaking the same language. And it seems like there's a lot of it's like they're lending to each other. You know what I mean? Because it's like listening to a bunch of experts kind of compare notes about stuff. So I just think that's really cool that you said you got people from different parts of the state that are all kind of in there together, and that you guys are gelling, not just as professionals, but as like on a personal level. Because that's I don't know, that's unique to me.
Yeah, no, it's great to have a diversity of experience and a diversity of background to any group like this, or most groups. So it's great. I would even mind some diversity from outside of medicine. I don't know what you would get if you threw in some non-teachers into your teacher group, but I feel like if we threw some like hotel people into our medical group, we could a lot better look at and solve some of our process problems, because I think we're stuck in the way hospitals have always been doing things. And there's other industries that do things a lot better than we do. We could probably learn from, but those are probably harder to get together. So I can't complain. I like the group makeup, and our chemistry is pretty great.
That's cool. So I have, I guess, one more question for you. I know that, particularly with, your career path, and I've noticed this has been similar when I've spoken to people, like I said, in other forums who've either been educators or superintendents. You get people who feel like, listen, I have a very limited window with the amount of time that I can kind of like dedicate to, other things, right? It's like you got career, you got life, and then kind of tapped out on people saying, hey, why don't you be a part of this or that? What would you say, honestly, to someone who might be listening, who might honestly be thinking, yeah, this sounds kind of cool, but look, man, I don't know if I have an hour to do X, Y, or Z. Is it really worth it? I mean, what would you honestly say to that person in all truth?
I mean, we have to make time for what matters. So this is like a multifunctional group. It helps with our professional life. It helps us work better at work. It helps our department work better, and it helps us. Like I think it builds against burnout too. We do a lot of meetings that probably could be consolidated or even eliminated. And I'd say be smarter about the rest of your day. But if you have an opportunity to do something like this, it's hard to imagine that it's not worth fitting it into just about anybody's schedule who could get into a group and could benefit. So, and it's not that much, and we schedule it in advance. So we get together and we say, hey, what's the best day for you? What's the best day of the week? What's the time? Ultimately, it'll be typically at the end of a work day, we'll meet up. And if we do something like, on a weekend, it'll just be a weekend that works for most people, if not all people. And if you schedule it far enough in advance, you can make it work. And, like I said, it's a lot of fun. This is a group that quickly becomes friends. So it's a combination of social and professional, and it's so beneficial. It's definitely the kind of thing you got to make time for. So it's easy to do.
All right. Well, I appreciate your honesty and I appreciate your time, Rich. As always, good chatting with you, brother. And I will talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks a lot, Brad. My pleasure.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to follow. And for more information, go to yancyforums.com.